And here are the cards. Is this all of them, Elizabeth? Is this the whole? It looks like too few. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Would you each take 3? The third one is just in case you mess up the first 2. It's a freebie. Yeah, I know, yes. And this may be, I do always feel, when we get near this time of day, I feel apologetic, and I shouldn't, but I will be. I have to leave you the minute we get to 6:30 as we do the closing prayers. I will disappear. I got bitten by a tick 15 years ago, and it blew out the circuitry of my heart. And I'm on the last drug that works. And for that drug to work, I have to be down 10 to 12 hours flat. I don't have to sleep that much. I wish I did. But I can read, unfortunately, and watch TV. But I have to be down. And so if I'm going to be with you in the morning, I'm going to flee like Cinderella leaving the ball as the 12 o'clock hitter. And I'm going to stop in a few minutes and take a drug, which has to be taken within 15 minutes of the hour on either side. So it's very new. You can make a whole neurosis out of this particular illness. It was not Lyme's disease, but it was a form of tick fever. And doctor's wife, you know, of course, I would get the bizarre thing, the 103 fever and the whole 9 yards. But I got off lucky. It just took my heart and nothing else. And I know what I'm going to die of. And there's something to be said of that. One day I'll be standing here and just won't make it. Check my pockets. Yes. That one I didn't turn on, I suspect. There we go. There we go. Okay. All right. The cards in your hand, I'm going to take back to the hotel with me. We come, most of you, I'm sure, are Diocese of Chicago, and you're aware that you have an Anglo-Emergent bishop, or I hope you're aware of it. Bishops that get on YouTube and cause a national flutter are definitely an Anglo-Emergent. The whole country loves your bishop, in no small part because of the YouTube things. It was wonderful when he came into the diocese. And the steering committee for Anglo-Emergence will be meeting in April here, guests of your diocese. So, and Ann and I were just chatting about it a minute ago. So many of you are familiar with where we're going to go tomorrow, which is to Anglo-Emergence and to hyphenated. And what that means for the church, specifically for your parish or for parishes like yours. Or I hope that's where we're going to go. And in order to do that, I need to take back with me this evening, because we come from various levels of background. You know, this is obviously not an all clergy, or this is not all professional religionists in the audience, and not all of you have read the same materials. And so we come from a variety of backgrounds. And what I would like on the first card, and I'll tell you both so you can separate, on the first card, I would like a really honest answer to why did you come here. Don't tell me because your mother-in-law said she'd beat you up if you didn't come. I mean, that may be true, but be more imaginative than that. Or why, and be honest, why really did you come? And it doesn't have to be a long, full card, but if you will answer that question. And second, theoretically, we're going to go to Q&A and general conversation tomorrow afternoon. It depends on how fast I get there through in the morning. But technically speaking, that's what we're going to do. Before we get there, I'd like to, on the second card, know from you what it is that most interests you about this. It can be what most troubles you or what most excites you, but what most interests you about this whole business of emergence Christianity and the shift. You have the right to change the answer tomorrow, but I'd like to know tonight as I lie there making my drug work, I'd like to be able to have some time with you and with your thoughts. So if you would just take a moment or two to tell me honestly why you came, and then on the second card. But don't screw them up. We're going to take them up separately because they are two separate questions, and I've got rubber bands to separate them. So if you will do the first one, and we'll take them up, and then ask you to do the second one. as you finish the first one, if you would be kind enough to pass them to your left, even across the aisle, if you don't mind, and I can go up that way. I can go, except you're passing them to your right on that side, aren't you? And over here to you, and I will just go up the center aisle and get, this is question number 1. And then obviously I'll come back and get number 2 in a minute. You all have to go to your right, and these folk have to go to their left, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm not rushing anybody. I thought we were there. I'm sorry. Okay, is that, yeah, that's all. Okay. Thank you. Got it. Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, all ones. Onesies. Thank you. Makes me feel like I'm doing grandbabies again. Onesies, that's a scary term. Your daughter starts talking about onesies, you know you're in trouble again. Thank you. Only it's my granddaughters now who start talking about that. Great-grandchildren are ever so much nicer than grandchildren. You can really send them home. Is this it? Is this all the ones? Okay. Is that ones you're handing me here? Okay, thanks. And that's ones. Okay. And then if you will, okay. Thank you. Now it feels more reasonable. Is that ones? Okay. Thanks. And is that it? All the ones? Okay. Now, if you will give me the twos as soon as you're ready. The theory is that we'll be able to guide tomorrow better if I have this kind of sense of who we are and what we're here to do. We'll see whether it works or not, but that's the theory. You guys are quick. Oh, you have another one. Okay. Great. No problem. I'm collecting twos. Can't do it. Digitally challenged, apparently. Thank you. Okay, and those are twos. And twos. Twos. That's okay. If you're still going, you're still going, not to worry. Twos. I'm doing twos. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Joyce. Okay. I was going to say, I'm short. This is a shorter stack than the other one. Still writing. Well, the whole point is to be able to say what you mean to say. So if it takes another 2 or 3 minutes, go with it. Okay. Twos? Twos. Okay, thanks. We're doing it. We're getting there. See, you just furnished me my bedtime reading. So take the cards to bed with me and see what we get. Okay. Thanks. Any more coming? Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And we will see what we get out of that. Now, what I would like to do with this little shank of time that we have this evening before we go our separate ways for the evening is continue the looking at the Perry Emergence. And I'm so glad that you got to see the clip, the Did You Know clip. The Did You Know conferences happen every year. And as Elizabeth said, this one was in Rome. These people are specialists in terms of what the emergence looks like, and that's their area of study, is why is it happening and what does it look like. And I just think that those clips, and there are several conferences and there are several clips, so really if you Google did you know conferences, you'll get past ones. This one, as Elizabeth said, happens to be Rome that happened last October, but you will see the progression of the data as it, particularly as it applies to things like Moore's Law. Moore's Law having to do with the fact that we now understand that the ability to compute, our skill in computations, doubles every 2 years. And as you saw, I hope, it's predicted that sometime in the next 10 years, a computer's ability to move quickly will double every 72 hours. And one of the things that's not on that clip that you need to be very aware of is that in May of last year, Roadrunner, which is owned by IBM and the United States government, the National Science Foundation, managed to pass the petaflop, which is P-A-T-F-L-A-P. The petaflop was thought to be the barrier beyond which no machine would go. And IBM kept saying, yes, we could do it. And what the petaflop is that Roadrunner managed in May, and has several times since, managed to do more than a quadrillion, execute more than a quadrillion procedures in less than a second, which is mind-boggling. I said to you earlier that always when we go through one of these things, there is a central question. It's always the same question, where now is your authority? But every time we go through one of them, there is also a set of 2 or sometimes 3 subordinate questions. It's not that they're subordinate in importance, but it is that they hang under the authority question. And we have 3 for the Great Emergence that we have to answer beyond where now is our authority. And the first of which is, what is human? What does it mean to be human? We don't know that. Descartes answered it for the Reformation by doing that thing that every kid now knows, cognito ergo sum. Or if, you know, you're Monty Python, I always have to do the Monty Python bit. Remember Monty Python? René Descartes, that drunken old fart, I think, therefore I am. Which sort of puts him in his place. So he kind of gave an answer to the question. That answer has sort of evaporated even as we speak. One of the things that it's interesting to chase as you do this history of the peri-emergence is to note that in 1859, the laboratory in Weimar opened, where Franz Mesmer, discovered that there was indeed somebody inside you that I could, with somebody inside me, manipulate. The Renaissance brought us, for the first time, a sense of individualism. We sometimes forget that the first novel in Western experience, first novel period in human experience, was not published until 1499, which is when you're into the Peri-Reformation. And for a novel to work as it was La Celestina out of Spanish literature, if you want to go look at it. For a novel to work aesthetically or any other way, there has to be a recognition that there is somebody inside my skin and somebody inside your skin, and that I can feel my skin enough to sort of predict what you're doing, or to imagine emotions and reactions that you might be having. That awareness of another human being simply wasn't there. And one of the marks of Reformation is individualization, pathologic almost. Salvation became me and my Savior, me and my Jesus. And that's a product of the Reformation, of individualism. But it took another essentially 400 years, well, 350, for us to get into the peri-emergence and begin to pick up people like Franz Mesmer. And we get the word mesmerize from him. He was the first to discover that he could indeed manipulate you. And we'd call it hypnotism or mesmerism. It was a form of it. And of course, it goes from there to Freud, and from Freud to Jung, and to some extent William James, and from Jung on to Joseph Campbell. And we'll be looking at Campbell in a minute, I hope. But what we've got is a progressive beginning of experimentation, almost from the beginning of the peri-emergence, with what it is that's in there, with who's in there. It is aggravated more than anything else, I suspect, by the drug age. By the time we get to the drug age in 1960, We are, and the drug age was horrible. Nobody's saying otherwise. And it's never left us. We still have it. But it also, like all knives, had a good side. And that good side was that we discovered that if I give you the same amount of the same drug at the same time of day, and you've had the same amount of stuff to eat and drink, and the same amount of rest, I can predictably and reproducibly, that's the part that matters, reproducibly change you from person A to person B, which then leads very quickly, almost immediately, thank you, Timothy Leary, almost immediately to which one am I? Am I A or am I B? Which immediately means that we are beginning to define ourselves in terms of our self-perception, which is very idiosyncratic just by definition. And it's aggravated then by the time you get to 1992 and 93 by Prozac. Remember when Prozac came out? And when Prozac came out, it also sparked a lot of books, listening to Prozac and Prozac Nation. And I was still in the book business as a professional religionist, covering for the religion for the book business. And I did meeting after meeting as those books came out and hit his bestseller list. And these were professional publishers and publishing people to whom I was talking, booksellers. These are not fools and idiots. Well, you'd have to be in the business, but I mean, you know, they're credentialed fools and idiots, okay? Some of them named Rupert Murdoch, but who's fast getting out of the business, book business, in a world of hurt right now. But I never discussed those books ever without having at least one person meet me under the steps or going into the ladies' room or just at the end of the hall in a dark part saying, you know, I am clinically depressed. And that drug made all the difference in the world. And then it would be followed, but I don't take it anymore. And you knew that was why we were back in the back corner. And I would say, why? And the answer was always one of two things. Because if God had meant me to feel that good, he would have made me that way, which just breaks your heart. Followed by the other option is, because my pastor said that if God had meant me to feel that good, he would have made me that way, which is clerical malpractice if ever I saw it. You know, I just wanted to take a bunch of pastors out. Fortunately, it didn't appear to be many priests, but there was a lot of pastors that were passing that thing off. But we began with the drug thing to realize we really didn't know. And it's followed in the late 60s and the early 70s by the beginning, first of cognitive science. The first Turing machine really comes in that. And Alan Turing is the first that really makes the computer. Yes, it's binary. Yes, it goes 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. That's not how we think. But it's beginning to do something very much like artificial intelligence. Now it really is doing artificial intelligence. And one of the things, if you want to go home and look at China Brain. It's hyphenated, China Brain Project. China Brain Project is now well in progress. It is funded, obviously, by the Chinese government. It's being run by Hugo de Garis for the Chinese government. It's running on a pure PC. And sometime in the next 3 years, it not only will be able to compute much faster than you and I ever will, but it also will have developed emotional reactions. And at that point, how you feel about who you are ceases to be a definition. At the same time that all of this is happening, out of the drug business, we are also beginning to develop more things than just Prozac. We're beginning to develop all kinds of understandings of pharmacology and psychopharmacology and psychochemistry. And we're beginning to realize that the brain and the mind and the body are all part and parcel, and they probably really aren't the same as consciousness, and we don't know what consciousness is, and we don't know what makes it. And then that fool Einstein with his fool quantum comes along, and we begin to discover that the reason we've not understood the brain very well is probably, especially if you listen to Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Hameroff, probably because our brains work on a quantum principle as opposed to a Newtonian principle. And that's why we've not quite known what it is that's in there. And so we honestly don't know whether. We used to be able to say we differ from the animals. Clearly animals think. We've had to admit that for a while. We differ from them because we have an autobiographical self. We can't even say that anymore because the autobiographical self can be changed, and it's been changeable right from the time Mesmer began to mess. with us. And so what you get is a society that can absolutely fall apart in April 4 years ago when this poor housewife, bless her, in Florida, who's been on a machine for 19 years, and her husband wants to let her go, and a whole nation stops dead. And we stop dead to the extent that the governor of the state makes an official decree. The House of Representatives in this mighty country makes an official decree. What are they decreeing about? They don't know whether she's is. We don't know what's in there. We have no clue. And we are as naked as we can be. We tried to deal with that problem slightly earlier with the abortion issue, and it politicized too quickly. We honestly don't know when life starts. The Pope had a go at it yesterday again, and bless his heart, how a celibate man's going to know one way or the other, I don't know, but that's a different issue. You know, it won't kick him in bed. You know, but we hope it won't. But we are filming, aren't we? That's unfortunate. Anyway, but the truth of it is, abortion hinges on this. But more important, penal code hinges on this. What we do with criminals, and what we do with the drug addicted and the drug damaged and the babies that come out of coke marriages or coke unions, all of that is up for grabs. Now, why does this matter? Because until we know what it is to be human, until we know what the definition is, we have no way then of saying what a soul is. And we're in the soul-saving business. And honestly, I used to, 4 or 5 years ago, I would hand out index cards at clergy meetings and say, just don't sign the card, but finish this question. The soul is. And I quit doing it because it ceased. You know, if I'm going to be iconoclastic, I like to know it so I can enjoy it beforehand. And this you got blank cards back. Or you got cards answered with the seminary answer. Or you got cards back with, I don't know. Or cards with a counter question, what is imago Dei? That whole thing is up for tosses. And it's one of the things you're going to have to deal with. It's one of the things you're going to have to deal with if you're laity, because you vote. You're going to have to deal with it clerically because you counsel people, because you're in the soul-saving business. And so there's some things happening in here that are deeply important, and I want to chase one or two more like that, but especially the business of what does it mean to be human. And I ask you to bear that in mind as we move along. One of the things that's not up here, of course, and one of you pointed out to me, and I didn't realize I had jumped it, is the year 1869 when Das Kapitas comes out. The first real political threat to sola scriptura is communism. You can argue that correctly that it comes out of Hegelian philosophy, that Marx draws on Hegelian thought. That's absolutely true. But the fact is that you're deep into the beginning of the peri-emergence when he actually formulates it in such a way that it begins to rear the state as the better good and makes God a lesser good. And we get the first political attack on sola scriptura. Now, running along here with some other things that I think are imperative that we look at, I want to look at 1907 and a thing called Azusa Street. Most of you know the Azusa Street story, but it bears mentioning in detail here simply because it's going to be one of the things that we also have to deal with. Azusa Street there was a young man, a young African-American. His mother was named Phyllis, so I'm partial. She was born a slave in Mississippi. William Seymour was born free. But he earnest Christian, he'd been baptized, and he felt deeply that there was more to it than baptism, that there was more to it anyway than the baptism he had known. And as he read his Bible, he became more and more fascinated by the day of Pentecost and by the fact that the Spirit did come down visibly, and there was speaking with tongues, and there were miracles. And he said, I believe that story. Why has that not happened in 2,000 years? and he began earnestly to pray and to seek the counsel of God. And he moved across the lower part of the United States, moving west. They stopped a while in Kansas with the Fillmores. If Charles and Myrtle Fillmore mean anything to your memory out of seminary and comparative religion, American religion, stopped with the Fillmores for a while, eventually made his way to Los Angeles, where he stayed with a cousin. And he began to preach on Bonnie Brae Street in Los Angeles. He began to preach at night. And he would preach and preach, begging for the Holy Spirit and assuring people that if they could just purify themselves and humble themselves, indeed the Spirit would come again. It was not as idle a thing as it would seem. There had been an outbreak in Sweden and an outbreak in Canada and an outbreak in North Carolina, very near the part of Tennessee where I was born and reared, where Tennessee and North Carolina kiss each other, so to speak. There had been outbreaks of the Spirit, but they had been very transient, and they'd been self-contained. It had not spread. But Seymour said, you know, this has happened. It can happen, and we're going to pray until it does happen. And one night, so many people assembled that they tore the porch off of the cousin's house, and the cousin took it rather personally and said, get out. And they went down the street to an old Methodist church that had been deconsecrated and made a livery stable. And he reconsecrated it, cleaned it up, and began to preach. And about the second week of his preaching, the Spirit did descend. Not on him, but on a member of the gathered assembly there. And it was quite dramatic. 2 nights later, the Spirit descended on Seymour himself and then on a number of those gathered. And when I say this, Episcopalians are not real happy with Jesus. We're very happy with Christ. And we are really unhappy with the Holy Spirit, sort of. The Paraclete's just fine. We like those Greek words, you know, they distance us lest it get too close. Well, baby, this right here, this was Holy Spirit, come down. And you can park it wherever you want to. But if you go back to the LA Times from that era and actually read the coverage by hardcore reporters, I don't recommend it because it hasn't been scanned. It's still on microfiche, and we all know from graduate school days microfiche is a booger to deal with. But it's there. And the records show that observers watching what was happening in Azusa Street saw not only the flames of fire, they heard also the xenolalia, that is tongues that, well, glossolalia is tongues, as you know, that are totally strange, and almost anybody can fake that if you want to. But they heard xenolalia, which is to say they heard Caucasians who had never been anywhere near China or Russia beginning to speak in Russian or in Chinese or whatever. Or they heard Latinos beginning to speak in German. That is, they were speaking in known tongues that had been previously totally unknown to them. And most startling of all, there were miraculous healings. And you can talk about psychosomatic medicine, and it's true. Time gave, or Newsweek 1 gave a whole issue to it last week. But you cannot psychosomatically cure a broken bone where it's a complex fracture with the bone sticking out of the skin. When that happens and the bone retracts and the skin heals, that's not psychosomatic. That's something else. And so as the word began to spread, more and more people came to Azusa Street. And the preaching went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for about 2 years before they began to spread out from the Azusa Street stables and to spread, as you now know, across the world. Why does it matter? It matters because, well, it matters for several reasons. The first reason is that for the first time, people were gathered equally in gender. The first time in Christian worship, it didn't matter whether you were a woman, a man, or hermaphrodite. As long as you were there, it was okay. It was the first time there had been social equality, total social equality. The wealthy supported it, yes. But they also came and they worshiped with the hoi polloi, and they became ecstatic with the hoi polloi, and it didn't matter. It was racially integrated from the get-go, and it still is. And the this is to say racially and culturally. Latino, Asian American, Caucasian, African American, all worshiping together. It was the first egalitarian expression of Christianity that has happened since perhaps the 1st century, and we're not even sure about that. But it's for sure. Pentecostalism has been informed by those things ever since. It is gender inclusive. It is non-tribal in every way. It is totally egalitarian in its worship. All people are welcome. It matters also because one of the things that we've got to figure out what to do with in the Great Emergence is we have to figure out what we're going to do with the fact that the Spirit has now come back into history. The authority question cannot be answered until we begin to figure out what we're going to do with the presence of the Holy Spirit. And because we're not used to that. We were figuring it out for 2,000 years. Now, that's not to say we weren't praying. Of course we were. It's not to say we weren't discerning. It is to say we were not actively engaged in an active agency of God that was physically visible and very definitely, passionately present and dramatically present. Now, when I did The Great Emergence, Baker being the book, Baker being a fine and responsible publisher, and because it's they took the manuscript and took it to a couple of colleges and had it vetted by both the faculty and upperclassmen to be sure that everything was kosher and defensible and would play, which is wonderful, and that's how it should be. There was only one thing that didn't pass muster, and that was they asked me to take out, it was in a footnote because I knew I was on shaky ground. It was in a footnote. They asked me to take out one thing. I'm now going to have my way and reinsert it, okay? Which will prove to them that you cannot well, never mind. The thing they took out was that the medieval mystics, the most prominent of whom was Joachim of Fiorne, if you want to look him up. Joachim of Fiorne and the other medieval mystics taught that there would be 4 ages to history and 7,000 years. Now, this is a little woo-woo, okay? This is why the scholars wanted it out. They taught 2,000 years of God the Father, which they said was from the beginning of creation through to the Great Transformation. 2,000 years of God the Son, which they said began with, they didn't call it the Great Transformation, began with the change of the era, began with the coming of Christ, and would end in 2000. And then they said there would be 2,000 years of God the Spirit, in which God the Spirit would actively re-enter Christianity and re-enter the claiming of the kingdom of God. And then there at the end, that would end at 4,000 of the Common Era. And then there would be 1,000 years that they didn't quite know what to do with because they hadn't yet read Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, which was, but, what can I say? But there was consistently that strain of the notion that somewhere around 2000, the Spirit would re-enter the human drama. For his trouble, Joachim was excommunicated by the papacy. I think 60 years after he died, they didn't get moved too quickly. They did excommunicate him and called him weird. And, Hildegard of Bingen was weirder than Joachim would ever be. We would have put her away. Prozac would have fixed her, and a lot of the other mystics. So it amuses me that Joachim caught it from the papacy. It also interests me that 3 years ago, the Vatican moved to reinstate him. I know his soul was delighted to be back within Mother Church and really appreciated it, and went so far as to open an office of Joachim Studies in the Vatican now. So the assumption had always been that prophecy stopped with the revelation of St. John and the Apocalypse. And now the question is, did prophecy stop? How do we know that prophecy has stopped? And you see many more liberal or open denominations like the United Church of Christ, for instance, are the Disciples of Christ putting up slogans now. Did God speak with a period or with a comma? Or God left a comma and not a period? Or what makes you think that the last word is that period? Questioning whether or not. So you can put that wherever you want to, and I totally understand why scholars didn't want it in there, because it's very iffy. And the argument was you start doing that kind of thing, and you sort of demean the seriousness of everything else you're saying, and it's incontestability, and I was appreciative of that fact. But I do think it's interesting that even the Vatican itself is no longer so sure. And I know for certain and sure that when we answer the authority question, one of the X factors is where do you put an active, present Holy Spirit? And I also want to say to you that right now, if you ask sociologists or people like me who are professional religion observers, we have to say that there are 4 tributaries, if you will, flowing into the river that we call Christianity. That's not my metaphor, it's Gary Crawford's, but that Christianity, if you conceive of it as a river, has 4 tributaries going into it. By size, they are Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, Anglicanism, and Orthodoxy. The reason I say that there are 4 now, and there will be 5 sometime within the next 5 or 6 years, is because they're already there. Really what we've got now is we've got Roman Catholicism, Pentecostalism, Protestantism, Anglicanism, and Orthodoxy. Pentecostalism is growing. The Church of God in Christ, which is the largest organization or denomination within Pentecostalism, grew 805% worldwide between 1975 and 1989, I believe it was. That's a huge growth. It is now the fastest growing part of Christianity, stripping out even, except in this country, stripping out even the growth of emergence per se. Where they can be separated, I'm not quite sure. But I know emergence is heavily influenced by Pentecostalism. And about a quarter of emergence Christians are of the Pentecostal natal beginning and of that persuasion. So that all comes into play. That has to be brought to the table as we think about who we are and what we're doing. And you cannot overemphasize, therefore, 1907 and Azusa Street and William Seymour. So be it. Enough said. I would go from there. Probably I would go to the Holocaust and Kristallnacht. I was a child during that, but old enough to know what was going on. And in an academic family where conversation had to do a lot with what was going on in the world. We absolutely did not understand. Those of us in the hinterlands, you can go to the Holocaust Museum and see some copies of the New York Times, but they are very few in number, where there is some attempt to publicize what was actually happening to the Jewish population. Those, however, who could get out, and it's always the ones who escape, as you know, are always the empowered ones. They are the enabled ones. They have the money, or they have the, like Einstein, they have the brights, maybe. They're the ones who got out. They did get out. The rest of the jury obviously did not. But the ones who got out came to this country, and fortunately we were bright enough to welcome them. And when they came with the knowledge that we had no clue about. We had no understanding. We couldn't even make a firecracker go more than 20 feet, or a Roman candle. And we knew that in order to win that war, we had to be able to position things bigger than Roman candles in the UK and shoot across the North Sea and across the Channel into the landmass of Europe. It was the only way we were ever going to win that war. And the Jews showed us how. And so for the first time in human history ever, for the first time, they came in possessed of, they showed us how to split the atom. The correspondence between Roosevelt and Einstein would break your heart. As Einstein says, when you unleash this thing, it's going to be horrible, but you're going to have to unleash it because the consequences of not doing it are worse. And as he tries to, within the Jewish tradition, make that moral decision and to help Roosevelt make it. And so what you have for the first time is a nation that accepts and embraces and really values Judaism, to absolutely take it in and love it and want it and to respect it. It has never happened before. And again, if you're prophetically inclined, you're aware that when that happens, there's supposed to be some other things that happen, biblically speaking. But we embraced them and we welcomed them. I had at the magazine, when I was working full-time as a journalist, using that term loosely, when I was working, I had a devout Jew, child of the Holocaust, who was my immediate superior, and whom to this day I love enormously. And when she was feeling depressed or down a little bit, she would say to me always the same thing, Tickle, Tickle, the one thing Sinai did not prepare my people for was to be loved. And as she mourned the loss of Judaism in this country and in this culture by enculturation. by the fact that, and she would then say, you're going to love us to death. You're going to marry us. You're going to destroy Judaism. And that's really sad in many, many ways. But it allows people like Jack Spong in 1989 to write a bestseller called Jesus, My Hebrew Lord, and make an absolute bestseller out of it because it was such a radical idea. That's 1989, that was a radical idea. What it has done, though, is raise up a generation of emergence Christians who are Judeo-Christian. And there's a big difference. Do you hear me? I just said something significant, believe it or not, even if it's late at night. It has raised up a group of new Christians. The new Christianity is deeply Judeo-Christian. That is, if you had told my father, whose mother was of Jewish descent, ironically enough, if you had told my father that Jesus was a Jew, he would have either struck you or wiped your mouth out. It would have been incomprehensible. And this was a man of great learning, and a great stature. It would have been a shocking idea. If you say to an emergence Christian now something about the two Bibles or the Hebrew Bible or something, he or she will look at you and say, no, it's one story in one set of covers. Don't go telling me it's two stories in one set of covers. Give us the Old Testament. Give us the narrative. Give us that which is ours. And increasingly, Christianity is just a tsunami or a paradigm shift that happened when Judaism burped in the change of the era, and we came next. The notion of Christianity superseding Judaism is, you can't sell that dead dog. All you can do is bury that one, and it stinks to heaven. And you're not going to sell it to emergent Christians. That's just not there. So as that happens, the claiming of the whole tradition has both enriched and given much texture to Christianity for these young people, and the desire. Sometimes when I go among them to speak, they want me to tell them again the story of Melchizedek. Excuse me? But I understand. Tell us about the Melchizedekian priesthood. Tell us that story again. Or tell us about Tamar. Tell us about why she was Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-grandmother and she conceived by her father-in-law. These are stories that matter deeply to emergence Christians. So at a practical level, what does it mean for you as a pastor or a priest, if you are? It means give them the Old Testament, baby, but you better give it as a part of a narrative. Don't give it as isolation. Because one of the major shifts in this is the reclaiming of the narrative and of the whole narrative. What we're going to do with Ishmael, I don't know. But it definitely, I truly don't. That one's, the jury's still out on that in many ways. After that, I would go to 1935, 37, and 39. The reason for 3 years is that 35 is the year that Bill Wilson actually gave up and said, you know what, I'm a drunk. Nothing's working here. I'm a drunk, and I need help from other drunks. And he established Alcoholics Anonymous. In 1937, they incorporated it. And in 1939, the Big Book came out. And the Big Blue Book matters hugely in religion, as does Alcoholics Anonymous itself. One of the great ironies to me is that almost every church of any size now has an AA chapter meeting with it, which is called Taking the Viper to Your Breast kind of thing, if you look at it historically, though I think it's wonderful that it should be so. AA is the first time to assume that sometimes the wounded can help the wounded better than clergy can or better than professionals can. It's the first serious blow against clerical authority. It also assumes for the first time, and I know this is wrong, I know that this is but it's the first time that the force be with you. You can live with a generic God. You don't have to call him Jehovah. You don't have to call him Yahweh. You don't have to call him Jesus. You don't have to call him whatever. You just have to recognize that by whatever name, there is a force and that you are dealing with that force. So generic God enters the American conversation. The other thing is that book. because when that book goes on sale originally, you have to be a member of AA. But it teaches you how to begin to deal with the person inside, how to begin to deal with the person inside each other, how to begin to live a fuller life, how to begin to practice better psychology, how to begin to understand how to live. When it goes on sale for the first time in 1959 in bookstores is the beginning of the self-help movement. And from 59, when that book goes on sale, I used to have merchants laugh and tell me, you know, it's always in the back left corner. And I put it there all the time, and I have to buy 3 or 4 copies that I never sell because it gets worn out. And a merchants will, Barbara's here in Chicago used to have a hard time with these things because they would say, you know, you can tell with the intention with which they go back to that back corner that they're not coming out for an hour and a half. They're ashamed to buy it, you know, because it might look like they need help. And so they just sit there on my floor and read it. It used to be kind of a joke. The merchant would just wear out 2 or 3 and go buy some more and bring them in. But from 59 on, you can watch Hazelton, Est, all of those things begin then. And we begin to play with spirituality. And it's the coming of spirituality. And now spirituality is a buzzword, and I know, and this is where it gets offensive to a lot of people. I don't mean to offend. But the difference, first of all, before the Tin Lizzie, and before the turn of the century, this was a very rural country. We were an agrarian country. We had a church building that on one Sunday might have the Baptist preacher, and on second Sunday might have the Methodist circuit rider. The third Sunday was Presbyterian. The fourth Sunday was Grandma or Grandpa. It was just how American rural generic Protestantism was the order of the day. And if there's anything in the world you can say about generic rural Protestantism in this country is it has absolutely no sex appeal. There is no bells and whistles. There's no schmells and bells. There is nothing. It is absolutely sterile. Now, in an agrarian society, that's okay. In an agrarian society, for one thing, you are usually really tired. And you don't need a whole lot of spiritual direction because you haven't got a whole lot of time for spirit. You know, and also you're out in God's, you know, whether you like it or not, God's telling you some things as you cuss the mule because you're out in space. When we begin to move to the city, and when we begin to develop that awful thing called idle time or free time, and in the city there is more free time, then we begin to discover more and more about what Mesmer was playing with, more and more about what's in there, and more about how uncomfortable it is when that isn't in a body that's so tired that it drops down too. That wasn't a clear sentence. When you are not so tired that you can't hear yourself, then you're in real trouble. And from 59 on, we are definitely urban. We are definitely full of free time. The war has given us all kinds of technology. I mean, it's cool, and we got all these things in our head. And we begin to wonder about what makes the good life. And it's the beginning of spirituality. Does that mean that there was no spirituality before? No, I didn't say that. Roman Catholicism had it. Anglicanism, to some extent, had the smells and bells. We had some spirituality, but it wasn't big on the radar screen. And there was absolutely no conversation about it per se. You just went and bought books that told you how to feel better or how to... You get the beginning of the spirituality thing in the 70s for very good reason. And we'll get to the reason in a minute. But you begin to get the spirituality thing, and we suddenly went wild. I'm spiritual but not religious. One more person tells me that, I'm going to barf in their face. You know, because for the first thing, it's like saying I'm a human being and not bones and flesh. Of course you've got a spirituality, you know, and of course it's religious the minute you voice it. But we went so far that we began to talk about spirituality as if it were the religion. And we lost the words Christian spiritual formation or just Christian formation. If there's anything that truly troubles me about all of this, it's a free-floating spirituality. I think it's dangerous as all get out. because a lot of it depends on just applied logical psychology as we now understand the human animal to work. And so there's an that's not to say that Christian spirituality shouldn't be pursued. I didn't say that. I just said that there's a change in there, and that's part of what affects the emergence. Since I did it, let me go and say in 1965. 1965 is the year in which we changed the immigration laws. And that's a big part of what happened to spirituality also, to the growth of spirituality. If you will remember American history, at the close of the 19th century, we were building railroads faster than anything else. We were trying to connect the two continents. And nobody was getting wealthy except the railroad barons. And they were getting wealthy because they were using Asian labor. Serf, pure serf, almost slavery. Bringing them in for nothing, paying them absolutely nothing, mistreating them terribly, driving them to 15-hour days, laying track, and it was awful. The people who were most hurt, though, or the empowered ones who were most hurt, was the American blue-collar labor, the guy who couldn't possibly compete with Asian workers and who therefore had no income. And they lobbied Congress, and you can watch it from about 1879 as the first legislation. You can watch the lobbying of Congress to prevent the influx of Asians and the gradual loss of any kind of rights at all in the Asian population that was in this country on this land base. Finally, by the time you get to 1921, there is this draconian law passed by our Congress that says even if you were born in this country, if you are of Asian descent, you have no citizenship rights, you've got nothing. It was a total stripping. By 1965, we had had 3 world wars, or 3 big wars, that had an Asian theater involved. World War II and obviously Korea and Vietnam. And human nature being what it is, our boys had gone over, and eventually our boys and girls, and they had come to love the people among whom they were living. They had come literally to love them and to marry them. And they wanted to be able to bring their Asian mates and their Asian children, or their Asian-American children, back into this country. And they lobbied and lobbied and lobbied. And then in '65, they got the Immigration Act that allowed full access to this country for people of Asian descent. Well, what happened? What happened was that in this land and this culture that was deeply troubled and unsure of itself spiritually already, that couldn't quite figure out what that was about, and was struggling with part of what AA had given us, struggling with self-help, suddenly we get a major influx of a culture that is totally comfortable with the subjective world, that's got all the rhetoric, that's had all the vocabulary, that has had centuries of being able to talk about the non-visible world, about how indeed one works in the world of the imagination, how one works in the world of the spirit. And all of a sudden, we have, remember, everybody wants to be a Buddhist. Can you remember that? Yeah, it was incredible. And it just sweeps across the country. And you get these dumb things like, Jubus is still a word in Judaism. A Jubu is a good Jew who practices Buddhism. I had a really good Baptist friend who spent hours and hours before she learned to put her heel behind her neck for the sake of her soul. That isn't even Buddhist. That's yoga, Hindu. But she was sure it was going to help. So I got a manuscript once from a publisher who said, I wish I had kept it because it's a true story, nobody would believe me, who said, we've got this manuscript and I'm not sure it will work in the market. Would you look and see? And that was part of what we did at the magazine. And the working title on the thing was, How to Be a Good Jewish Buddhist with Christocentric Proclivities. And I said, I don't think so. I just don't think it's going to work. Christocentric proclivities? What in the world? It sounds like dandruff or something, But it was an attempt to do all. And so we got that rash of spirituality that came in. And part of what you're getting in emergence Christianity is a reaction against the silliness of that heavy emphasis on on Buddhism and spirituality and all that began to die down about 2 or 3 years ago, and it's being replaced by some real urgency about trying to figure out, once again, what the Holy Spirit is. How do you separate this knowledge that there is a subjective world, there is a world of the Spirit, and where is the role of the Spirit in that, of the Holy Spirit, or the Paraclete, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, before we do prayers, right quickly, I want to, because she matters, in here we had this little thing called the Second World War. And it was horrible. There's no question about it. I can remember Pearl Harbor. I had a brand new pair of saddle Oxfords, and we were on our way to church. And I wasn't allowed to wear my saddle Oxfords anywhere except at church until I'd gotten them scuffed a little bit. And I was going to show them off. And as we got almost to church, the boys started crying, "Extra, extra, Japs hit Pearl Harbor." And my father pulled over, bought the paper, and turned right around and drove us back home. And I was so angry at those Japanese for having screwed up my shoes. I will never forget. Talk about a child's perspective. But we had nothing to fight that war with. Most of you aren't as old as I am, so you don't remember. But we really didn't. You've read about it in books. We had sent everything we had. Rather than mothball it, we'd sent it to the Japanese, and they were pleased to return the favor by sending it back fully loaded. So we had nothing. We had no tanks, we had no airplanes, we had almost no Navy at all. But we had men, and we called him Johnny. And Johnny went to war. He did, and he was conscripted, and some of them volunteered, but it was clear that it was an all-out effort. We had been attacked, and we were going to have to go to war, and we did. But Johnny could not fight a war if he didn't have guns and ammunition and planes and all of that. And so we took her, and she was Rosie the Riveter. And she's now a national icon. Originally, she was Wendy the Welder, and I don't know what happened to Wendy. You don't hear about her anymore. But briefly, about 1.5 years, she was Wendy. And then she became Rosie the Riveter. It's the first time, and Rosie was working so Johnny would come home. We need to understand very clearly, Rosie is working for the sake of the home. It's the only way Johnny's going to get back is if she does her trick well. So she takes her 2 kids down the street to Grandma's house, down to the picket fence. Grandma hated this war, but she took them down, and she worked her 10-hour days. And she threw those rivets. She did the same job Johnny was doing. And it didn't take long, 16 months, I was told by the head of women's studies at the University of Michigan. And how she knew 16 months, I don't know. But 16 months from the time we start mounting that female workforce in factory type work, it's 16 months or thereabout before she realizes she's tired at the end of 10 hours. She's truly, truly tired and doesn't really want to go straight home to the kids. Grandma be damned. And so she remembers that Johnny, when he was tired, would stop by the local pub and have one. And she begins to stop and have one. Does that mean that Rosie's turning into a drunk? No. Some nights probably she drank too much. Some nights she probably called Grandma and said, "You got him overnight," and Grandma could listen to the lisp and figure the kids were better off with her. But by and large, no, we didn't turn into a nation of female drunks. What we turned into was a nation of women who discovered for the first time in Western history that they could have a social life independent of domestic duties. It's hugely important. They could have a social life independent of domestic duties and thereby independent of clerical or church duties also. This was freedom. Now, it was incredible freedom. They also discovered that they got paid. And they got paid with money that they didn't have to have a family council. It's not that Johnny had been a Scrooge when he was there. It's not that he refused to give them money, but it was that he had to say what was going to go where, and then Rosie had deployed it. That was the traditional model. Now she didn't have to ask anybody. She deployed it. And God knows she needed it because we were only paying Johnny, even if he was a sergeant, $24 a month. And you can't have 2 children on $24 a month. You couldn't do it back in the 1940s. It just didn't work. She had to have her salary. But sometimes at the end of the month, there was a little bit left over if she was careful. Maybe enough to buy a lipstick that she ordinarily would not have been able to afford. Or maybe enough to get a toy for a child who truly, truly wanted it. And she knew the joy of being able to do that with money she had earned. And so it's a wonderful thing in its own sad sort of way. And then the war is over, and Johnny comes home. And what happens? Rosie goes back to being Mrs. Johnny. And Johnny comes home, and we call him June and Ward Cleaver, you know. And they're pathetic but because they don't know what to do. Now she's got 10 hours of nothing to do, and a washing machine, and an electric stove, and a hot water heater that comes from being plugged in. What in the world is she supposed to do? She goes to church and tries to find that third good place there. And the growth of mainline Christianity happens because Rosie hits it in the early 50s all the way through. When you see figures about how Christian we were in the 50s, that's Rosie looking for a place to park. Now, Rosie is content to going back to be, and this really does sound feminist, which is why I want to get it done tonight, even if my heart stops and we don't do prayer. I want to get it done before we get out of here. Rosie, because it's dead serious. Rosie, it goes back to being June Cleaver or Mrs. Johnny, and it's fine. But the trouble with June and Ward is they had two little boys. If they'd had a girl, you would have seen in that TV show that the girl remembered. The girl, and this really isn't a crack at men. This is just how it was. The little girl remembered that there was once a time, not too long ago, when Daddy wasn't there, and sometimes Mama even whistled. Or sometimes Mama kind of hummed. Or sometimes there was a little money, and you could go and say, I really want that doll, and she made it happen. Or sometimes they had nights when they wished they couldn't hear the angry voices after lights were out. And she grew up, did Rosie's daughter, saying, it ain't going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me. And we called her Gloria Steinem, and we called her Betty Friedan, you know. And she went forth to get an education because it wasn't going to happen to her. Now, also at the same time, for the first time in World War II, we had WACs and Navy and Army nurses. When the war was over and the GI Bill came into being, for the first time, they qualified. They hadn't in the First World War because they weren't nearly as important. They were office staff. Now they qualified for college education. And so you've got Betty Friedan, who's determined she's going to get one because she's not going to live Rosie's life. Or not, if she lives Rosie's life, it's going to be her choice. She's not going to be victimized by having nowhere else to go. And you've got this influx of women who are college educated simply because the government paid for them, so why wouldn't you do it? So you get your first level of educated, college-educated females beginning to function in the last part of the 50s and in the 60s in this country. And the coup de grace is that in 1963, the birth control pill goes on the market for the first time. And I know religionist after religionist who will say you cannot overestimate the importance for American religion of the birth control pill. It is not that we did not know how to control fertility. I love saying that, the woman with 7 children. But anyway, you know, we did. We didn't like the methods, but we knew how to do it. If push came to shove, well, that's an unfortunate image, but if, whatever, but we did know how to do it. What we didn't know was, educated as she might be, it was still an uneven floor, an uneven ceiling or whatever in the workforce, because as long as Mrs. Murphy is coming to town, a woman is going to have 4 or 5 days when she's not at her intellectual best. She's not socially quite as comfortable as she might be. Her attention is a little distracted. Mrs. Murphy is not your best friend in many ways. And as long as that was there was not going to ever, I have not for the life of me ever understood why it is more desirable to go around mad 31 days out of the month the way men do as opposed to 5 days and getting it over with. But whatever, you know, whatever. So what we've got is an unequal playing field until the birth control pill. And it doesn't take 16 months, I promise you, because I was taking them. It didn't take me 3 months to figure out that I could borrow a few pink pills from next month and claimed to the doctor I dropped him. Well, I was married to the doctor and I could get what I wanted, but you know, I dropped him down the commode accidentally or something. And so I just borrowed 3 or 4 days from next month. And I put off Mrs. Murphy's visit until the board of directors is gone, or until the big meeting is over, or whatever the thing at work is that's important. I'm now regulating it. Now, if you're following modern medicine, you're aware that most young women now don't have menses at all. They will come off of drugs to suppress it when they get ready to get pregnant, and will be off for about a year, and then we'll try to conceive. So that it's a moot point now, which is why it really is an even playing field. But from then on, you can begin to get an equality in the workplace of the gender. Why does it matter? It matters because for the first, up until even during the war, Rosie was doing what she was doing for the sake of the home. Johnny was doing what he was doing for the sake of the home. When he came home, he went out and conquered the world, but he did it for the sake of the home. Now they are both leaving like this to go out and conquer the world. They are coming back at night dead tired, both of them, along with the 2 kids who are worn out with daycare, and everybody flops down in a miserable mess of exhaustion, and there's no time for anything. You may say prayers, but you're not going to do a family altar. You're not going to do the kind of transmission of the stories that used to happen when Mama was there. Am I saying we were better off with Mama there? No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you think in value judgment. This is just what happened. This is sociology. This is what, and so you get the beginning of the biblically illiterate. You get the beginning, and one of the worst mistakes the church ever made was not understanding that it had to step into that breach and begin to teach the Scripture. And it didn't. It just didn't. We had all kinds of programs, but we didn't teach the story. We didn't teach the faith. And so you get the beginning. We're now on our 2.5 generation of the biblically illiterate, and we're going to talk about them tomorrow. But the fact that the home now does this, and it no longer is the anchor. And one of the reasons that the Emergence Christianity people are desperate for community is they don't have this one. Now, they may have an apartment, or they may have memories. And nobody's saying they're abused. I'm not saying that. It's just that wasn't the center for anything except changing your underwear and sleeping. And that's a whole difference from being a home sweet home. And so that change has affected and informed the great emergence psychologically, but certainly emergence Christianity. And Elizabeth says it is time. And I shall leave you and see you in the morning. God bless you.